The Dead Time Radio Show is hosted by Dawn and Billy, two coworkers who discuss their interests in the odd, esoteric, creepy, and occult stories, sprinkled with a large amount of humor and sarcasm. Dawn and Billy search the internet for interesting stories and share them with you. Give them a listen now on Podbean, Apple iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and find out what all the recent buzz is about. Check out their website, thedeadtimeradioshow.com. Shoot them an email at thedeadtimeradio@gmail.com or give them a ring at 843-492-7966. Again, guys, it's called The Dead Time Radio Show.
It's time to explore wrestling's past and potential future with your weekly dose of a segment we call What If? Only found here on the WWE Podcast.
All right, welcome to your What If segment for the week. And if you're listening to this, of course, thank you so much for being a patron of the show. If you're the Raw tier or higher, then you have access to the show. And thank you so much. And this week, we've, of course, got Anthony DeMarco back here to discuss one of the biggest topics that I don't think is often discussed enough, which is why we're doing it tonight. And that is, what if Stone Cold Steve Austin never got injured back in 1997 at SummerSlam, the infamous pile driver by Owen Hart? So let's dive right into it, Anthony. First of all, how you doing?
Not too bad, man, but I'm really excited because, like, our first ever What If segment, we were talking about The Rock. Now we're going to talk about Stone Cold Steve Austin. And in my mind, these two are the two biggest superstars, bar none, probably in the history of the company. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I wanted to start out with these two. I think it is, number one, household brand value. I mean, everyone knows who these guys are, and these two things are some of the biggest topics not explored that people don't really think about, right? So with The Rock last week, and we talked about what if you never won Hollywood, and this week, as you said, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I don't think there's a bigger name in wrestling. You can make an argument for Hogan and all that. I think Austin didn't burn the longest, but he burned the hottest, and I want to get into this right away with what would have happened. And man, I know that you weren't watching in 97. I had come in actually just after this happened in 1997. I started in October of 97 watching as the first ever Hell in a Cell with HBK and Taker. But I saw many flashbacks. I've obviously since watched the match between Owen Hart and Stone Cold. And in really an injury that could have easily killed him or paralyzed him at the very least. Austin definitely got lucky, given the fact that it was just I forget what he called it. It's like an axial load or some actual. There's a medical term for what had happened. Getting dropped right on the top of his head. And when it happened in '97 during the match, I'm sure you've seen it, even though you didn't watch it live as I didn't. It was scary to watch back because you could see his body straighten out, and Austin has since done commentary talking about this moment. His body straightened out. He couldn't move his arms. He could barely move his legs. Owen Hart had to buy time messing with the audience because Austin told Earl Hebner, look, I can't move. I can't effing move. And Owen Hart started to buy time, and in one of the, as Austin would call it, the worst roll-ups in the history of roll-ups, and it was god-awful. But what are you going to do? He's half paralyzed. Austin ends up winning the match, and this was for the Intercontinental Championship, too. So do you remember watching this for the first time, and what were your thoughts?
Well, it's scary because it's one of those rare moments where reality kind of seeps into this alternate universe that we know and love as WWE or WWF at that time. And to see it happen in such a bad and visible way, because sometimes guys get hurt and they're able to cover it up. Like, let's say Triple H when he tore his quad in 2001, he was somehow able to finish that match. Or like something of that, like when it's a limb or like you pull a muscle, like The Rock did it against in his match against John Cena at WrestleMania 29. Like there are certain injuries that you're able to, quote, play through the pain. And we see it sometimes like in professional sports, like hockey or baseball, you can mask some injuries. But when you're dropped directly on your head and you weigh 250 pounds, primarily of solid muscle, you can't really hide that stuff. And this was an instance where we saw a guy just in so much pain, gruesome pain, and it was evident, like when you watch it back in slow motion, you see his head, way too low. I think he was like just above Owen Hart's kneecaps. And I do believe that particular move is now banned in WWE, and probably for good reason. So yeah, it was one of those moments where reality really took center stage in a product that is mostly based on fiction.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, scary, and which is why, as if you remember, or maybe you don't, or some people don't even realize that when Austin had faced Undertaker or Kane after this, many years after this, in 98, 99, and 2000, he never took a tombstone. He would always be able to squirm out of it. What they would use on Austin is the choke slam. I never, ever, ever saw Austin take a tombstone from Taker or Kane after this event. And rightfully so. If I was Austin, you can't even leave that up to chance. As much of a professional as Glenn Jacobs and Mark Calloway are, you can't ever consider that risk again. So that's just something I noticed. And I believe it's been pointed out by Austin himself. So this was a moment that forever changed the career of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, one thing I'll say, as much as this cut short his career, and we'll get into that as the years go on here, the one good thing that possibly came of this, two things maybe. Number one, I think this, and Austin has admitted this, so this isn't really my original thought, but Austin had said, had this not had happened, his style may have remained a technical wrestler, kind of a chain wrestler. This forced him into more of a brawling type of style, which ultimately fed into his character of Stone Cold Steve Austin being a brawler. And number two, what about Vince McMahon? Would the whole feud with Vince McMahon had happened? Because with the whole first stunner that happened in Madison Square Garden, it was all based on Vince not allowing Stone Cold to come back because he's injured. And Austin told him, "You can kiss my ass." Boom, we're off to the races with the stunner. And so those are the two things. So do you think that the Austin McMahon program would have happened if the injury didn't happen?
It's hard to say, right? Hindsight is 2020. But I mean, let's say he didn't get injured. Like, who's to say if he would have even had that big of a return? The classic phrase of "you don't know what you have until it's gone." Maybe if Austin would have just stayed consistently in the product and in that Intercontinental Championship picture, he would have never been thrusted into that main event scene, because perhaps the crowd would have never gotten behind him. Because a lot of times crowds really get behind wrestlers when they are away a long time due to injury. And I use Edge as that example, as a guy that when he first disbanded from Edge and Christian, he was injured on and off, I would say, for close to 2 years. He missed WrestleMania 19 and 20, and then he really hit the ground running fully healthy in the spring of 2004, and out of nowhere, the crowd were just so behind him because he was injured. Obviously, Austin didn't miss close to that amount of time, but I think it's applicable here, because who's to say? Maybe Austin just gets lost in that shuffle. Maybe he becomes just, one of the best Intercontinental champions, something kind of like a Chris Jericho or whatnot. And the thing about his wrestling style is it's also notable as well, because everyone likes a chain wrestler, but I think that there is a part of the crowd, and I could be a part of this as well, that you do like that brawler. You don't want to see just chain wrestling. Even a guy like, let's say, Shawn Michaels, he could mix in that high flying. So the fact that Austin was able to adopt, that new type of brawling style probably fit in with his perfect, anti-hero type of character, like you previously alluded to. But another thing that, like, a positive that came out of this, and it's so hard to, attribute positive to this particular situation, but he ultimately had to take a year off in 1999 to late 2000, and I think that's where The Rock really exploded as a top-level babyface, and where Triple H kind of cemented himself as a main event level heel in Austin's absence. Like, The Rock took Austin's place and Triple H took The Rock's place. So I also think that's a very big positive that came away from Austin getting injured.
Yeah, the fact that Austin, in '99, it's Survivor Series when they did the whole him getting run over by a car, which ended up being Rikishi. Maybe we could talk about that at some point. I have questions, so many questions about that storyline and why Rikishi was jolted in that position, but I'll stay on track here. Yeah, that did certainly benefit The Rock. A massive hole had been created, and The Rock filled that hole very nicely. And like you said, he was allowed to be the focal point, the top level babyface in place of Austin while he was gone from, I believe it was, November till September. I believe it was a late September in 2000 when he returned with the new Disturbed music. I even remember him stunning William Regal that night as he came out to read, I think it was Shakespeare or something. And that was just such a funny stunner that night. But that did allow a lot of stars to really step up. And Austin had alluded to the fact that he couldn't even watch wrestling during that time because he was, number one, just depressed about what happened, jealous about not being able to be in that position, and also concerned that he would never be able to come back again. He wasn't sure. And that The Rock exploded during that time. That is a positive. Although, again, the net negative is, well, what about Austin? Had Austin stuck around, would The Rock have still risen to the level he did? I mean, there's just so many variables. But certainly in 1999, as we roll on, and Austin is as hot can be, and we have The Rock also on the ascent. I believe did The Rock turn babyface during that Survivor Series matchup? That it was a tournament, I believe, for the WWF Championship. Was that when The Rock turned on Vince McMahon and the corporation?
If I recall correctly, and watching it live, I was about 5 or 6 years old,
right.
So I hope that my memory doesn't mistake me here. But I'm pretty sure following WrestleMania 15, when Austin defeated The Rock for the championship, The Rock turned on Vince soon thereafter. And we actually saw The Rock and Steve Austin kind of join forces and fight against the corporate ministry. And I remember there's a sequence of matches. Again, I think it was kind of Undertaker and Triple H who were the figureheads of the corporate ministry against The Rock and Steve Austin. And eventually, you had the Union join forces with The Rock and Austin, which I believe it was Test, Shamrock, Mankind, and Big Show. And then eventually, obviously, we had the big reveal of the higher power, which was Vince. And I think The Rock was kind of full steam ahead as a babyface by the summer of 1999. I do believe he had a feud with Billy Gunn, which was weird leading into Survivor Series. But I know that Survivor Series match was supposed to be Triple H, The Rock, and Steve Austin. And no, The Rock was full-fledged babyface by the summer of 99 because he had the match versus Triple H on the first ever SmackDown for the championship.
That's right.
Where he was the babyface and Shawn Michaels gave him sweet chin music in the midst of him doing the People's Elbow. So I think The Rock was already turning and was on the road of being a full-time babyface. But when Austin stepped away, and even Undertaker had stepped away at that point in 1999 as well, they both missed WrestleMania 2000, which is just crazy to think that, Undertaker and Steve Austin not at a WrestleMania. And in early 2000, even Mick Foley was quote unquote semi-retired, although he had the match at WrestleMania 2000. So it really was The Rock show. He won the Royal Rumble, and then they had the fatal four-way match with each McMahon in every corner at that WrestleMania. So, I mean, it definitely benefited The Rock, but Austin, who was, as you said, as hot could be, him not being there really just paved the way for The Rock.
It did. And that WrestleMania 2000, which is never ever known as WrestleMania 16. WrestleMania 16 doesn't exist.
Exactly.
It's just always WrestleMania 2000, whatever.
Even the video game.
Yeah, which was, to me, besides No Mercy, it was the predecessor to No Mercy. But it was, that was awesome on N64, the WrestleMania 2000. Those that are, even late 20s, early 30s, or mid 20s even may know what the hell we're talking about here. No Mercy still just is so, it may not have the best graphics and it is ancient in today's standards, but damn it, it was just so good. So, the WrestleMania 2000 was, like you said, it was a big moment for The Rock. With the McMahon in every corner. It ended up, as we all know, at the end of that match, all the McMahons were in cahoots. It was all just a game to screw The Rock. And I believe that was the first time that The Rock bottomed Stephanie McMahon. and
Yep.
the crowd lost it. I was losing it. Which is funny considering The Rock and Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania 32 when Stephanie slapped him and he said, The Rock would never hit a woman, but I'm like, Rock, you have rock bottom Stephanie many times. But anyway, so The Rock did that. That was a big moment, but he ended up obviously losing the match. And so that was a big moment. But as we move on, though, of course, into 2000, the Austin returns after his surgery. 2001 is when the big turn. Was it 2001? Yeah, 2001 when the Austin turned heel and joined Vince McMahon, and then of course was part of the alliance. Was then pretending to be part of Team WWF to turn again on Kurt Angle during that match. Yeah, at Invasion to try to drive home the point. It was like that one last, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to pretend to be the old Stone Cold. I'm going to then turn again to piss you guys off. And it worked to some level. I mean, it was kind of weird. And Austin even alludes to this in his podcasts, if you listen to them, that part of his career, he said, with the Invasion angle, and even prior to his final match, he said it's all kind of a black hole. He wasn't in a good headspace. He's alluded to this many times as well. He doesn't really remember, he says, a whole lot of it. For better or worse. I don't know if that had anything to do with his drinking or just the fact that he was in a bad spot with his marriage. I know he was too. So it wasn't a great time, I think, for Austin, albeit the what thing came from the whole Invasion angle and him running or being the leader of the WCW and ECW group. So there is that. But they eventually turned him, of course, back in 2002. What were your thoughts, again, as we are getting close to the end now of Stone Cold's career? If he didn't get injured, would have anything changed between, say, 01 to 02 in that time frame? Would he have still turned heel? Did you think that had anything to do with his injury?
Well, I'll back it up to kind of early 2001 where he comes back. He had that short lackluster program with Rikishi, and it quickly kind of became Rikishi against The Rock, and then it transitioned to Austin against Triple H in the winter of 2000/2001, and then building to what is, in my mind, the biggest WrestleMania main event in the history of professional wrestling, Rock versus Austin at WrestleMania 17. I don't think that match happens, or maybe it happens, but we wouldn't still be talking about it in the same way had Austin not got hurt. Because as we previously mentioned, The Rock would not have become the megastar that he did during the year 2000 pretty much because of Austin's injury had Austin not gotten hurt and had to step away for a year. So The Rock would have probably not reached that mega over-the-top level babyface that Austin was, let's say, the year or two before that. And then when Austin came back in late 2000 and early 2001 and he won the Rumble again and he became the number one contender, and you're saying to yourself, like, oh my God, we're going to see Austin become the WWE champion for the first time in a year and a half, 2 years. And it really, really divided the crowd. And I think it was always a bit more Steve Austin. I think like that's fairly non-debatable. But because The Rock had become so big, I think it became just that over-the-top super main event that we're still talking about 2 decades later. And then as we move on more into 2001, I don't think he would have turned heel, because I could be wrong here, but maybe they said, okay, we can afford to try this heel character because we have The Rock to fall back on. Like, it wouldn't have worked with Steve. Well, it didn't work either way, but they could not have afforded to lose the babyface version of Stone Cold Steve Austin had The Rock not been at that level. Because obviously The Rock stepped away for 4 months following WrestleMania 2001 and came back in July. But those two were kind of like the faces of the Alliance and of Team WWF, and they were bouncing off of each other. So I think that we probably would not have seen a heel Stone Cold Steve Austin in 2001. And obviously you have the personal issues that were going on in his life as well. But I think that at WrestleMania 18, instead of fighting Scott Hall, maybe it would have been him fighting Hulk Hogan instead of The Rock, because again, bringing up The Rock probably does not get to that level if Austin does not get hurt in 1999. So there's just such a trickle down effect here that in a lot of ways it's positive, because you were able to build another megastar in the absence of Austin. But then on the other hand, the WWE probably made a lot of booking decisions, wrong ones at that, because of the trickle down effects of that injury.
That's the next big thing I wanted to ask, and I guess you answered it as far as would Hulk Hogan versus Stone Cold Steve Austin have happened? And my answer is probably yes, because as you alluded to and I've alluded to, he had personal issues, but a big contributing factor to that, the reason why, and Austin has said this himself, that he didn't have a match with Hogan, he said it was twofold. He talked about his headspace. He wasn't in a good headspace. That's a very vague thing to say. But I think the part of that headspace that he was in was injury. He said he was hurting. His neck was starting to flare up again. He had put on at that point 2 knee braces, and that wasn't just for looks. That was because he actually needed them, because he had reflex problems with his legs stemming from his neck injury. So he also thought that Hogan couldn't keep up with him. He flat out said that. He said that Hulk Hogan, he was worried, wouldn't be able to keep up to the standard, the level of quality of a match that Austin had held himself to. He felt that Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, wouldn't be able to keep up. And I understand that. I get what he's saying. But we all, as fans, know the limitations of Hogan. Like, we all know that the guy is not exactly a chain wrestler. He is the cartoon of cartoon wrestlers that became a megastar and a household name. We understand that. But I think if the injury didn't happen, again, all other things being equal, and Austin reached the level that he did if the injury didn't happen, because, I mean, again, this is such a butterfly effect. If the injury didn't happen, if Austin didn't get to the level he would have gotten to, then the match with Hogan wouldn't have made sense, because you would have been like, Austin's kind of a big star, but not to the level of Hulk Hogan. So perhaps the injury got him to that level, but also took away the possibility of the Hogan match. So it's all such a butterfly effect game, but I think that Hogan and Austin most likely would have happened. I think his injuries would have or did contribute to his, quote, bad headspace that he had at that time, and they should have had the match at WrestleMania 18. As good as the match was with Rock, and it was certainly good. I remember when The Rock came out to confront Hogan, I'm like, okay, Rock, like, awesome, we love you. This is a big match. But there's a bigger guy right now behind you. There is a once in a lifetime matchup. Why are we choosing number 2 when we could choose number 1 of Austin Hogan? I remember that. Were you, now again, I know you're a massive Rock fan, but were you slightly disappointed that even in that time you weren't saying to yourself, why aren't they choosing Austin? Why are they choosing The Rock right now?
You know what? It wasn't so much that I was saying, why are they choosing The Rock in favor of Austin? I was more saying, why is Austin doing nothing? Because I still to this day, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the main event of that WrestleMania had to be Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Triple H for the World Championship. Oh, yeah. Because the thing is that I do believe that in a lot of ways The Rock made more sense, aside from the fact that it was like Austin was that generation star and Hogan was the golden generation star. Like, The Rock will never supersede Austin in that respect. But I do think that maybe The Rock's charisma was able to bring up for Hogan's lack thereof, their wrestling styles. Like, I remember that match. Like, The Rock had to oversell like crazy to make it look somewhat decent in Toronto at WrestleMania 18. So, but it wasn't so much that I was saying like, oh my God, it should be Austin. But even when I watch WrestleMania 18 back now, which in a lot of ways, aside from Rock Hogan, was a bad WrestleMania, I just couldn't believe that you did not do Austin versus Triple H. Because look, we saw Austin Rock at a WrestleMania 3 times. 2 of those times for the World Championship. We saw Rock and Triple H against each other at WrestleMania 16, albeit in a fatal 4-way, but it was an elimination match, and pretty much the last half of that match was a one-on-one match with Rock and Triple H, and the year 2000 was predominantly The Rock versus Triple H, so we had seen that before. But we had never seen Austin versus Triple H. in terms of for the championship and at WrestleMania. I know we saw it in the winter of 2000/2001, but I just did not understand why they didn't go with that. And it's nothing against Chris Jericho. You know, he got a rightful push and whatnot, but the lack of star power in that main event, and nobody talks about that main event. And that was like the first time that Triple H had ever been pushed as a main event babyface. So I think, you know, you could have gone babyface versus babyface. Austin should have gone into that WrestleMania as the undisputed champ. So to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way, it wasn't so much that I was saying, why is The Rock fighting Hogan in favor of Austin? It was more, why is Austin doing flat out nothing at this Mania?
With Scott Hall. And
embarrassing.
No disrespect to Scott Hall. That's not a WrestleMania match. That's like, you know, any other pay-per-view match. It's fine. Like Austin and somebody of that caliber in the NWO and what Scott Hall did, obviously in WWF and then in WCW, that's fine. You know, that it's not that Scott Hall's undeserving of it, but not at WrestleMania. That is a different animal. And Stone Cold to be in there with Scott Hall, I remember I was saying to myself, why do I feel like Austin doesn't matter at this pay-per-view? In real time. I mean, I didn't have a podcast. I was, I don't know, 16, 17 years old, but what the hell's going on? It just, you know, and he stunned Scott Hall into oblivion, and there's some hilarious GIFs out there where he stuns Scott Hall and he like flies into space. I mean, there's some really, because he sold it like he got shot. I mean, it was a complete oversell of the stunner, and he stunned Scott Hall as well. And, you know, he did his typical, you know, drink beer and all that. It was fine, but I was like, this could be an ending to Raw. This is not an ending to a WrestleMania. And right after that, people forget this too, is he actually walked out in WWE the first time right after WrestleMania 18. Yes, we all know about the Brock Lesnar walkout, but this was the first one. Vince had done an interview with, I think it was Bite This or Confidential, when Mean Gene Okerlund was hosting it. And McMahon said, you know, this isn't the first time he's done it. You know, he said that Austin had done this one time before, and that was after WrestleMania, and he said he chalked that up to burnout, and he gave him a free pass. And then, of course, we all know the second time that led to like a 6 or 7 month absence from WWE, ultimately to come back in the Bell Center in Montreal, one of the loudest reactions I've ever heard in my life. And, you know, that's a whole other show as well. But, yeah, this to me was Austin Hogan, yes, on paper it should have happened. Stone Cold's a bigger name than The Rock. And that's insane to say, given how big The Rock is. Would the match have been better quality? Probably not. I mean, I think you'd have to sacrifice a little bit of quality because their styles may not have matched up as well as The Rock and Hulk Hogan's did. So I'm not complaining about that match, but for him to be in there with Scott Hall, it was just like, what's happening? And Austin Triple H, how it never happened at a WrestleMania is beyond me. I think that it absolutely should have happened because those two matched up so well. And my favorite match of theirs was, I think it was No Way Out 2001, when they had the 3 stages of hell match and they couldn't touch each other. That was so well done. And I'm thinking to myself, they could main event WrestleMania, and we had Triple H as a babyface. It felt weird. Jericho was the heel, and I know that Triple H was trying to pedigree Stephanie for weeks, and he finally was able to pedigree Stephanie. And I mean, that's the only thing I remember about that match at all. So,
well, like that's what I was going to ask you. Had Austin main evented WrestleMania 18 with Triple H like it should have been, would we still be talking about like how was it not him versus Hogan in favor of The Rock? Maybe in some way, but in the same way?
I think it would be brought up, but I don't think there'd be part 2 to this that you said of it's not that it necessarily wasn't Austin Hogan, but also it was Austin Scott Hall. It wasn't even a suitable replacement.
Exactly.
Where that's the problem. I think you'd have taken care of half of the problem by saying, well, it was against Triple H. They had a badass match. Austin became champion again. I mean, so the problem is you'll never take care of the problem the first problem of it wasn't Hulk Hogan versus Stone Cold. How did they miss that? You know, so that will never go away, but at least you could say, well, it was Austin and Triple H. They kicked ass. It was great. Where Scott Hall Austin was it was forgettable. All you remember is the oversell of the stunner, and that's pretty much it. So
it was a joke.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
It was. So, all right, well, I'm going to move forward here now into 2003. We all know what happened in the final match with The Rock in Seattle, Washington in March of 2003. Austin does the favors for The Rock, and from that point, of course, we see the sheriff, we see co-GM, we see, fired and being rehired and all this stuff that, of course, always happens to WWE when they fire somebody, which was entertaining. And I really loved him as the sheriff because it was Austin on my TV and he'd give people stunners, and that's what we wanted to see. But I guess the ultimate question is, and I'm sure you have more too, so I'll toss it to you beyond this, but what do you think, or when do you think, ultimate question, when do you think Austin would have hung up the boots? Maybe around the same time as The Rock, if he had not gone Hollywood? Or, what do you think?
I mean, I think that Austin probably would have retired a bit earlier because he started in the business before The Rock. I think that we would have probably seen Austin go right to the end of Ruthless Aggression. And for me, the culmination of the Ruthless Aggression era was WrestleMania 23 in 2007. When Cena beat HBK, Taker beat Batista, we had the Battle of the Billionaires. So I think we would have seen Austin go right up until that point and then, kind of ride off into the sunset. And I think that had he not gone injured, he would have stayed on Monday Night Raw. He was just a Monday Night Raw guy. He never fit on SmackDown. And I think we would have gotten our Austin versus Triple H WrestleMania match at some point. Because Triple H really dominated Raw for the entirety of 2003 and 2004. And there was kind of a rotating cast of babyfaces who challenged him over that time before, Batista and John Cena really exploded onto the scene. So, we had kind of Chris Jericho take a run at that, Kevin Nash, HBK, Chris Benoit eventually. But I think we would have gotten Austin in that regard. We probably would have seen Austin versus Randy Orton because he was part of Evolution. Maybe we would have seen Austin versus Shawn Michaels Part 2. Mm-hmm. That would have just been awesome to see. And I always felt like they had a really cool dynamic. One of the coolest Austin HBK moments, I think, was at the end of Survivor Series 2003 when HBK tried valiantly to get the win for Team Austin, and he lost, and he just shook his hand and said I'm sorry, covered in blood, the Crimson Mask, as JR would say. But I also think that his last match would have probably been against John Cena, because I've reviewed John Cena versus HBK at WrestleMania 23, and I said that although it was Cena's third consecutive WrestleMania main event as the WWE champion, that match beating Shawn Michaels in the main event really legitimized Cena as okay, this is a new era in WWE. He beat the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. This is the guy. That was kind of the stamp of approval. And I think that spot probably would have gotten reserved for Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I think in a lot of ways, Cena versus Stone Cold Steve Austin is a program that I think no one's ever really fantasized about, because, again, we got The Rock versus Cena. And it seems like because of that injury to Stone Cold Steve Austin, a lot of the moments he should have gotten went to The Rock. We saw the Golden Era versus the Attitude Era with The Rock being the Attitude Era. And then we saw the Attitude Era against the PG Era with The Rock being the Attitude Era again against Cena, which, like I just said, probably would have been reserved for Stone Cold Steve Austin. So, to kind of put a bow on it, I think that his final match would have likely been losing to John Cena at WrestleMania 23.
Well, you stole my thunder on that. And
really?
No, yeah, that actually would have been exactly what I was going to say as far as when Austin. And you know what? I think it would have been the right thing to do, because as much as I was not necessarily a fan of the soft, PG, family-friendly, jorts-wearing John Cena, going from just a stark contrast of Austin flipping the bird, drinking beer, raising hell, to this soft John Cena, although the PG era didn't start until late 2008. I understand that. He was the face of the PG era. I mean, he embodied hustle, loyalty, and respect, where Austin was, give me a hell yeah. It was just so, it was like I was turning back into a child, and I did not like that with John Cena. Now, again, massively popular. He is probably one of the best, if not arguably the best on the microphone ever. People don't understand how good John Cena is on the mic. He destroyed The Rock, and I hate to say that. He destroyed The Rock on the mic when The Rock came back, generally speaking. And so I think that would have been the right move, because it would have been a passing of the torch. I would have hated every part of my soul, would have just hated it because of my absolute disdain for the babyface character of John Cena, but I would have understood it. And I think John Cena was ready. He can talk. He had the 5 moves of doom, but he had longevity. He was a smart guy. He looked the part. He was the right guy, and I understand that. So I would have hated it, but I would have understood it. The other thing is, if Austin had done the favors for John Cena on the way out, which, again, is the right thing to do, I think what would have also happened is he would have come out of retirement once or twice after that. And I think possibly what would have happened is a CM Punk Stone Cold Steve Austin match that they teased in, I think it was 2011 or so, when they had the interview with Jim Ross promoting the WWE 2K12 or something. And they actually had, in that moment, that purpose of that was actually to get to a match with those two, but they said it fell apart. Austin had to get knee surgery, blah, blah, blah. So I think possibly Austin would have come out of retirement once or twice and done a couple of matches, one with CM Punk, which I think is really like a 0% chance at this point. But that to me is one of the things that also would have happened. And yeah, Austin probably would have hung it up against John Cena, doing the favors at WrestleMania 23 and then calling it a career. So yeah.
And it's sad, right? Because much like The Rock, I felt like we kind of got robbed of, the 2 biggest stars in the history of the company, or of the industry rather. And it's kind of more sad with John Cena, with Stone Cold Steve Austin, because like you brought up, The Rock was healthy and he just walked away, and then he came back and kind of gave us almost like a full-time run during 2011, 2012. As opposed to Stone Cold Steve Austin, that he just, he walked away in 2003. He had the nice year-long run as the co-GM / sheriff. But aside from that, he hasn't been around for, 18 years now, as opposed to The Rock that we got, little tastes here and there. And I still think that we will see The Rock back in the ring before he hangs them up. So
me too.
And the thing about Stone Cold Steve Austin is, and as big of a Rock fan I am, The Rock never touches him. Stone Cold Steve Austin, bar none, the best of all time, most popular of all time, and just unanimously loved. Because you will always find a person or two who says, yeah, The Rock wasn't for me. I have yet to come across a wrestling fan who disliked Stone Cold Steve Austin.
It's nearly impossible. I'm sure there's people out there that, he was just all about brawling. He wasn't a great wrestler. That to me, seriously, I mean, his character was so authentic, so well done. He was intense, good to great on promos. His finishing maneuver is one of the most popular, if not the most popular of all time. His music, his beer, I mean, like everything was just so awesome. And I don't know. I mean, you just mentioned 18 years. It has been 18 years, more than 18 years now since we've seen Stone Cold in an actual match. And yet when he comes back, he gets the biggest pop out of the entire roster. Always. I mean, I was there in the Brooklyn Center when they did Raw 25. And that pop was so loud when he came out, stunned, of course, Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon twice. And it tells you that there will never be another Stone Cold Steve Austin. And it's also kind of sad that they have not yet produced a reaction like that. And you're cheering for a guy that hasn't been in the ring in nearly 20 years. It's a testament to his longevity, his popularity, and also sadly kind of a speaks to the current roster and that the fact that WWE has been unable to really create the next mega star. John Cena may very well be that last mega star that he is bigger than the business. And yeah, Roman Reigns is certainly ascending very quickly as a heel, but right now, I mean, I don't see anybody that is, quote, bigger than the business. I think the last person that was bigger than the business was John Cena. And I think WWE on purpose will not allow that to happen again, because that gives that particular star, that person, more leverage than the business, which is a very, very tough thing to do as a star. And it also, again, doesn't give the business or WWE the ability to say, nope, we're doing this or that, and you have to do this, and you can't go on this show or that. When you reach the level of John Cena, The Rock, and Austin, you have the ability, the freedom to do what you want, and WWE likes their control. So I don't think we'll see a star of that magnitude, maybe ever.
And the thing is that I love good heels. You know, I think that it's done wonders for a lot of careers, like Triple H, arguably the best of all time, Randy Orton, what we're seeing in Roman Reigns right now. But the fact of the matter is that unless you could get over in a mega way as a babyface, you will never become bigger than the business. Yep. And that's what The Rock did. That's what Austin did. That's what Hogan did. That's what John Cena did. In a way, that's kind of what Batista did as well. But for guys like Orton and Reigns and Triple H, they were never like the big mega baby faces. They were always just the over-the-top heels. And that's great, but I think that you can't transcend the business unless you get over as a babyface. Would you not agree?
Babyface, right? Exactly. I actually love hot heels in a way a little bit more than a babyface. We all love great babyfaces. They're the ones that make us cheer. We buy their merchandise. They're the ones that bring smiles to our faces. I understand all that, but yes. So to answer your question, yes, you have to get to the mega babyface level, certainly, to do that. But I think a hot ass heel run gets you there. And I don't think WWE knows how to create real heels today. I mean, Randy Orton last summer was probably the closest we've seen. Roman Reigns right now is on track, but they are rare. And hot heels create hot baby faces in general. I think wrestling is based around and foundationally around hot heels, because you can't just have a bunch of great people who have, have their moral compasses in line and they're just so great and telling us about our dreams, like Natalia did this past week of, just if anyone looks at us and wants to think that their dreams aren't dead, well, ours aren't either. And like, I don't need all that vomit. Just this disgusting, like, incessant need every time a babyface wins a championship to talk about their dreams. And I want you to look to me to if you need inspiration in your life. I mean, seriously, if somebody is really looking at them in their life going, oh, well, thank God I was about to end it all if I didn't see Natalia win the championship. Seriously, I can't stand that crap. I don't think they understand how to really create either very well right now. There's so much ambiguity and in between, which is why there's a lot of indifference towards the product more often than not, is because there's very few people who are truly over either heel or baby. It's something that I don't think that they truly know or understand how to do right now, or they just don't care to put the effort in, or both. I don't know. But right now it is a massive problem, indifference on the product.
Well, look, I'll just give you an example of a casual, like, WWE follower. Like, my girlfriend really liked Drew McIntyre, probably because he's a very attractive guy, but I think she also liked the character when he was heel. And then when he turned babyface, she really liked him, this and that. But right around late last summer, around, let's say, the fall time, she started disliking him. And then even myself, I was just like, they just transitioned his character from a relatable guy when you come out, let's say, like in a suit or just like a t-shirt and jeans, and then they just turned him into Braveheart, walking out with like a sword and a kilt. And it's just like, I feel like they don't really know how to get either over right now. And especially with their baby faces, it's just like they get over being super, authentic. And that's how Drew McIntyre did. Like, I don't even know if there was ever a true babyface turn for Drew, or if they just did this gradual, slow process leading up to the Rumble in 2020, and then people naturally just got behind him. But then it's just like, okay, he's over. Now we got to turn him into a cartoon character, and now he's Braveheart. Like, what match did he come out quite literally with the face paint on? I was just like, oh my God, it's literally William Wallace. That's what they're turning this into. So I think Drew McIntyre is kind of like a microcosm of what's wrong with baby faces in particular and why they just can't book them right now.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation. I mean, I'm restraining myself from diving deeper. I'm going to unfortunately have to cut off the conversation because I don't want to go into it. It will take me a long time into a dark, deep hole about the fact of really their inability to create baby faces and heels effectively long term and stick with it and not flip flop and be kind of in between. To me, tweener is called laziness. I don't need the WWE to tell me, well, in real life, there's shades of gray. It's not everybody's all good and everybody's all bad. I would say nonsense. Yes, we have all good and bad inside of us, But when I'm watching a story, I don't want to look at somebody and go, yeah, I don't know what to think. I get it. Like, they're angry, but they're doing something that's kind of malicious. Should they take it to that level? I don't want to feel in between. And to me, when they tell us the excuse of, well, it's shades of gray, that mimics real life. In a story, though, when I'm watching a movie, I don't want to feel in between about somebody because that takes you out of it. You don't care. Emotional investment goes out the door. So that's laziness. That is not excuse. That doesn't excuse the fact that they can't come up with a formula and stick with it and create new stars. It has been a long time since we've seen big stars that you feel strongly about. Roman Reigns is an exception, and they finally turned him heel. But yeah, as far as Drew McIntyre goes, he certainly has kind of gone down the list for me, and it's going to be nice. Hopefully, after tonight, he loses and he does not chase the WWE Championship anymore. I want him out of the WWE title picture. I want to see what they can do with him when he's not talking about the championship. And I'm all for championships, but I want him in a personal feud. I want him looking for revenge. I want him in something different. His identity is all about the WWE Championship. And look, I love championships. That's why they're there. But I feel like Drew needs a different path. So I'll end there. Do you have any final thoughts?
No. That's it. I think we concluded Stone Cold Steve Austin, and then we went down kind of a bit of a rabbit hole.
I know. Always happens. So, but I think we mainly stayed on track with Austin. Biggest babyface, biggest star of all time. As I always say, people argue, oh, well, Hogan was bigger, or, NWO, or Hollywood Hogan. I mean, no, I would say Austin did not last the longest. He lasted in his peak 4 years, maybe 5 tops. And yet he, to me, was the hottest ever. He didn't burn the longest, but he burned the hottest. And I don't think anybody in the foreseeable future will even come close to that level. An absolute icon in the business, transformed the business, and it's unfortunate his career got cut short. But as we outlined at the beginning, there were some benefits to that happening, albeit not really outweighed, or definitely outweighed by the negatives. So, Anthony, as always, this has been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to doing this again next week, and I hope you enjoy the pay-per-view tonight.
You too, man. I can't wait to do this again next Saturday.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take it easy.
All right, bye.